Welcome to the Teachers on Fire podcast, where 21st century educators come to share, learn, and be inspired. We believe in the growth mindset, creativity, communication, critical thinking, collaboration, and strategic uses of education technology. Our mission is to share news and views from teachers who are crushing it in the classroom and making a difference for learners everywhere. I'm your host, Tim Cavey. Let's jump into today's episode. Today I'm speaking with Jarod Bormann. Jarod is an advocate for educator empowerment, tech integration, adjunct professor, learning designer, speaker, blogger, and the author of a new book, Professionally Driven, Empower Every Educator to Redefine PD. Jarod, thanks so much for coming on the show today. Are you ready to talk education?
Oh, absolutely. That's my passion.
All right, well, let's jump in. Why don't you start by describing a little further your current context in education?
So my journey in education thus far started off with secondary English, so middle school, high school English teacher. And right now I currently reside in the northeast corner of Iowa, which is a pretty small community. But from there, after I got my master's in instructional technology, I morphed into a new role within the state, which is with an area education agency. And to better get a picture of that, there are 9 of us throughout the entire state and we are state funded. So basically my AEA supports 8 counties in the state of Iowa with whatever schools need. A vast majority, I would say 3/4 of our agency is special education support. But where I come in and my role is more with tech integration or anything else essentially that doesn't involve special education, like standards-based education, project-based learning, a lot of pedagogical stuff that goes along with education. So the best way that I kind of describe it to my kids or to others is I help teach teachers essentially now.
Well, very cool. And it sounds like you would be positioned very well to write this book. And we'll get into that in a moment. But first, Jarod, tell us about a low moment that you faced in your teaching or education career and then how you overcame it.
So I actually do dabble into this story a little bit in my book, but it was a kind of a personal low moment for me. Teaching middle school English was a new challenge for me because my very, very, very first year, it was just high school English. And so getting into that middle school area was a whole other, a whole other learning experience. So what I quickly found out is that middle school readers are highly reluctant to reading. And so my first question that I was trying to tackle was, how do I inspire recreational reading with middle school readers? Well, the school at the time was using a program called Accelerated Reader, which, if you're not familiar with that, it's basically you get to choose any books you want from a predetermined list. And then from that predetermined list, once you read the book, you have to take a 10-question quiz to, prove that you read it. And then those scores are accumulated into the grade book. Well, to me, if you were to read a good book and you would walk up to me, I wouldn't say, hold on, stop right there. Don't tell me about the book. Could you take this 10-question quiz first to prove that you read it, right? We don't do that as adults. So why would I ask middle school readers to do it? So I saw them quickly turning away from recreational reading. And so what I tried to do is I went on my own learning journey of like, how do you keep middle school readers reading? And so I kind of created a culmination of a few different things, but I just called it Keep Reading Alive. And it's something that we did on a regular basis. But in doing this, when students finish a book, they just set up a book conference with me, kind of like a band lesson, no different. And so we would have that book conference and just have a natural conversation about the book. Well, the low point hit for me when the statewide testing data came back and the 7th graders that I was working with at the time on this, their scores went down. And so that data was put up in front of an entire staff. It was clearly visible for everybody. And of course, I felt all kinds of eyes on me when that showed up on the big screen in front of the entire staff, because I had already gotten a little bit of grief or pushback when I started to do things differently.
Right.
And that was uncomfortable for me to get that kind of pushback from more veteran teachers and having them say, well, how do you know they really read the book? You know, so trying to balance all of that was really rough. But all I did is I just made some adjustments to what I was doing with keeping reading alive. We did a couple other things that I found was pretty helpful with that. And then pretty soon the next year, that same group of 7th graders ended up increasing their reading scores by double digits. And through the formative data that I was collecting on my own for my own reference, it was very clear that a vast majority of the middle school students were actually doing recreational reading.
Wow, that would be a really, really tough moment when the information is up there on the screen in the staff room and you've got colleagues who are starting to give you the eye. But appreciate your resilience and just pushing through that. And I'm with you, and I can't say that I've done a ton of research in this area, but I'm appreciating some of the chatter on Twitter around not killing the joy in reading. And I've recently ordered a book called Sparks in the Dark by, that one's by Travis Crowder and Todd Neslony.
Oh, yeah.
And so far, it's all about just preserving that joy of reading. So definitely share that passion and that goal of, let's make them hungrier, not wanting to move away from books, right?
Exactly.
Last year, Jarod, you published Professionally Driven, Empower Every Educator to Redefine PD. So tell us about the main message of the book and how do you suggest that we redefine professional development?
So my big why behind this and the title and everything around it was the idea that when we say the letters PD in education, more often than not, it's met with grumbles, eye rolls, sighs, you name it. It's a lot of negative connotations that are surrounding the letters PD or the words professional development. So my goal was then, if this is truly what we experience as adult learners, what do you think we're going to ultimately carry with us into the classroom for our student learners? And so we want to redefine those letters PD to not stand for a stagnant thing we do, professional development, but we want to redefine that and create the conditions in the culture that allow us to redefine the letters PD to stand for professionally driven, which stands for us. And what I have found is that's really centered on three big ideas. The idea of growth mindset, which is a whole chapter is dedicated to the idea of professional learning as an adult. And how do we go through the active process of developing our own growth mindset versus us just talking about growth mindset with students and using the word yet 50 times a day. And then the second big idea is intrinsic motivation. Now, Daniel Pink's book obviously really transformed my thinking on a lot of this. And the idea, and it was funny because I was reading that book, and at the same time, I was seeing a lot of these trends on Twitter. And I like how you mentioned that you keep the thumb on the pulse of education through where the vast majority of educators are, and that's on Twitter. And that's where I also get my information a lot of the times and keep my finger on the pulse. Well, as I was reading Drive by Daniel Pink, I was also seeing on Twitter a lot of these trends, and I was also seeing these sessions pop up at conferences all over about gamifying PD or badging PD and this and that. And I'm like, the two ideas were so contradictory because I'm seeing this happen, but yet over here we have a book that culminates a lot of different studies that tells us that those are a lot of extrinsic motivators, and those extrinsic motivators don't have long-lasting effects. So then the idea becomes, if extrinsic motivators don't, then how do we create the conditions in the culture that allow for intrinsic motivation to take over within educators in terms of their own learning? Because we know that that's more longer lasting and sustainable. And then the third big idea that this really rests on is the idea of sustainable autonomy. So kind of piggybacking once again off of Daniel Pink's work a little bit about the idea of autonomy and mastery. But oftentimes what I see in schools and in education is that autonomy is a one and done event. Like ed camps, I have had school districts say, Jarod, we did an ed camp last semester and the educators loved it. And so I say to them, so when's the next one? And they don't have an answer. So basically you allowed your educators to be autonomous once. And you saw positive stuff from it, but yet you don't plan to do it again. So what I try to talk about is, if you truly want that autonomy in order to build the intrinsic motivation to allow educators to develop their own growth mindset, that autonomy needs to be natural and sustainable, which means time per month given within that contractual PD time.
Wow, that is all music to my ears. I really like the sound of that. And you're right, there is kind of this thing in education around professional development. There's this kind of response, at least from some quarters, that is not very favorable. And maybe with good reason,
Hmm.
but I love what you're doing in terms of asking the question, how can we make educators hungry again? How can we create the right conditions to really engage? I can't help but think about while I'm listening to you, Jared. I can't help but think about inquiry-based learning and some of the principles that are mirrored right there in the classroom as well. And I just look back at your three main points of growth mindset, intrinsic motivation, sustainable autonomy. And that's been an area of interest for me as well lately in the past year, just thinking about how can we encourage our learners into that same space. So there's some interesting echoes, I'm sure you would agree, between the classroom and between us as educators.
Absolutely. In fact, I highly encourage within my book that we use the word educator, because educator really is a building administrator, it's
Mhm.
a classroom teacher, it's a para educator, it defines all of the adult learners within your building. And more importantly, if you are an educator, you are also a learner. So if you are in charge of learners, you are also learning along the entire duration of your entire teaching career, whether that's a building administrator, a classroom teacher, or anything else. So, yes, I would definitely agree.
And it's so important. I know we need to move on, but it's so important to model that learning. I love that language of calling ourselves learners. And I think it's so important for teachers to say, hey, guys, I'm learning about this. I have a lot of questions here. We're going to try something new. I mean, just model that growth mindset. Take yourself into some uncomfortable places in front of your students and show them that it is safe to fail and it is safe to try new things. And you're still passionate about your own learning journeys. So.
Absolutely.
Awesome stuff. Yeah. Awesome stuff. Well, Jared, let's talk about education, bigger picture maybe. What is it that excites you about education today?
So this is one that I really had to think a lot about because there are so many things. But I would say the one thing that really does excite me the most is this huge push, and I would say this has even happened. Again, I've been in education. I think this is my 11th year total, and there are more well-seasoned veterans than myself, and they probably see things occur over time. But I would say the thing that excites me the most is this push for upper level thinking.
Mm,
So I do this keynote where I talk about how we always in a lot of cases compare classrooms of today to the classrooms of the 1800s and that industrialized revolution, right?
hmm
Well, the notion that I put out there in my keynote is the fact that I don't think we go back far enough to where we want education to be. And I want to go all the way back to caveman days where problem solving and figuring things out is exactly what we want education to be today.
right.
And that is essentially STEM and inquiry based learning and all of that. But we can see this huge accelerant through the use of technology because when we have something like Google, when you talk about Bloom's taxonomy and those various levels, well, the very bottom one is recall. Well, because of Google, that's pretty much doing a slow fade altogether, completely out of the entire equation, because we don't necessarily need to recall everything. We don't need life to be like Jeopardy. We need it to be more like CSI in terms of trying to figure out and problem solve, analyze, evaluate, create, getting into those upper levels. So here's what I see with technology. Technology, and I had a teacher say this to me one time in a large group setting where they say, because they were going one to one, like, why do we need to use this technology? And I say to her, well, if my goal is to have students evaluating, creating, and analyzing as frequently as possible over the longer course of time, I've never been able to do that with a textbook or a worksheet or a packet.
Hmm.
It has always been through the use of some kind of piece of technology or various pieces working together in order to make that happen. So that's why I like the use of technology in a pedagogical way, can really push things into the upper levels. But that's also where I see a lot of educators all of a sudden get that deer in the headlights look and get really scared because for the vast majority of their teaching career, they have gotten really good at getting students to master the lower levels of thinking.
Right.
Well, when technology takes that away and it pushes us, it forces us to a higher ground of thinking, and when we accept that and we go towards that, we then realize that we get to more valuable and long life learning. than what could have been, just even 20, 25, 30, 35 years ago, just because of that internet and some of the technologies that's come about since the internet.
Wow, love everything you're saying. And I think we see that dynamic clearly sometimes in coding, right? A lot of teachers have a lot of big fears around coding and programming, and yet, to sort of set that teacher free sometimes, it's all about understanding that, hey, you don't have to have every answer and every solution. You don't have to be a complete master of this before your students start into that kind of work. It's just simply saying that I'm here to support you and I'm learning right alongside you. But you're right, that technology piece comes with the problem solving, and it also opens up that tolerance for ambiguity piece, because it's not always going to be it's not always going to be the same answer for every student. And sometimes the answer, quote unquote, is not even the goal anyway. So love that. Let's move on, Jarod. What's another area of passion and learning for you? We call ourselves lifelong learners. So what is it outside of the field of education that really adds fuel to your life?
So because I do a lot with technology, I get up in my headspace a lot in terms of the creating aspect. But in terms of the physical aspect, I've really enjoyed moving to the northeast corner part of my state because there's a lot of recreational things that are available. So I recently have taken up kayaking. I do a lot of hiking. I do a lot of camping. And so branching outside that in terms of survival skills and stuff like that is of interest to me. So I find myself digging into that and being more fascinated with that since actually relocating to this part of the state. So that's been a lot of fun for me and also for my kids. And that's why I really enjoy my summers with my kids, because we have easy access to such recreational things that I can hopefully teach my kids that healthy balance between the use of technology for the betterment and the efficiency for life, but at the same time, teach them how to really disconnect and dig into the learning process that doesn't even involve technology in terms of outdoor skills and enjoying what nature already can provide us in terms of enjoyment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned kayaking. Have you tried paddleboarding, Jarod?
So that is kind of like the next iteration that I want to get to. That paddle, it looks like a lot of fun.
Oh, so good. So good. You
You
got to
do
get out there.
you do a lot of paddleboarding?
I love it. It's one of the ways my wife and I started dating, and we've kept it going right into marriage, and it's fantastic. There's nothing like it, but there are pros and cons, I guess, to every watercraft, right? And I'm not sure paddle boards, if you're in some river systems there in Iowa, I'm not sure paddle boards would work in some of the white water, but yeah, something to try for sure.
Yeah, the waters here stay pretty low, so I think that we can manage.
Well, share about a personal habit, Jarrett, that contributes to your success. And this does not need to be education related, but what's your secret sauce in terms of daily productivity?
I would say it's a consistent and perpetual seeking of what I can be better at. We see a lot of people and even educators that tend
Hmm.
to just focus on what they're good at and continue to do that, where I like to be physically
Right.
active, and so I try to do CrossFit from time to time just on my own up in my part of the state. And I the one thing that I really learned from the CrossFit community is that perpetual seeking out of weaknesses, because we know that that is the first step of a journey that we can turn that weakness into a
Mhm.
strength. And so I don't shy away from weaknesses. I don't shy away from things that may make me feel uncomfortable, and I try to make those learning opportunities as much as I can.
Well, you're articulating the growth mindset quite well. So I love that. And do you sort of think that through on a deeper level through journaling, or how do you have a process there?
So as far as I don't think I really got knee deep into the growth mindset stuff until I first read Mindset, obviously by Carol Dweck, which I know we're
Right.
getting a little ahead here in conversation, but I that is like one book that I've never had a book apply to so many facets of my life, and that has been one. And so I did start to get really intrigued by that, and then I had the opportunity to hear his name is Trevor Reagan, but if he operates the website trainugly.com, and he works with a lot of athletic groups, companies, stuff like that. And I feel like, really broke down the language of growth mindset in a very tactile and workable process for me that allowed me to then think about how that happens in education. So I have to give him credit. He's also in my book, but I give him a lot of credit just because, Dweck stuff can get kind of heavy with the data and everything. But in terms of what that really means, he broke it down in an easier way to digest it.
Very cool. Well, I've signed up to do a 3-hour workshop on growth mindset for another school division in the fall. And, part of my thinking there, Jarod, is I actually don't feel like I'm ready for that. But since reading that book, I've actually been, like you, looking for those challenges that stretch me into some uncomfortable places because it's there that I know I will grow as a professional. So you sound like a guy I need to stay in touch with for any tips on this workshop. We're going to move into some rapid fire recommendations, Jarod. So start out by telling us about someone we need to start following on Twitter.
This was so hard, but I would probably say someone who consistently puts out really good tweets that pushes the thinking is Mandy Freilich. She's a good friend of mine that I stay in touch with on a pretty regular basis, but not just because she's a good friend of mine, but also the fact that she's just putting out good content. She blogs. She really addresses the needs of educators. I was fortunate enough to contribute a vignette to her book, The Fire Within.
Okay.
But she's got another book that's going to be coming out called Divergent Teaching, or that's kind of the working title so far. But it's going to be really good stuff, I think, in helping develop that culture of what we want adult learning to be.
All right, and we'll make sure to get that link into the show notes. So thank you for that one, Mandy Freilich. Freilich, did you say?
Yeah, Freilich.
Freilich. And next, Jarod, point us to an edtech tool that you currently love using in your day-to-day work.
I cannot say enough good things about Wakelet. It has become something that I use more and more on a day-to-day basis. Storyfy went away, and this is not just a good replacer of that, but it does so much more than that. In fact, I've been working with Dr. Randall Sampson, who uses Wakelet in order to help educators get grad credit by curating their learning. And I worked with him in terms of doing the book study for my book, the online book study, and Wakelet was the tool that was used to curate all that information. So it's a great tool if you're looking to build just like a portfolio or a curation of information, or like right now I'm using it to just gather articles and research for a possible doctorate down the road. So I'm kind of prepping some of the stuff that I think I might need in what my learning journey may be down the road.
That sounds awesome. I can't wait to take a look at that. I think, now I might be wrong here, but was Storify used to sort of curate and compile Twitter conversations?
That was his primary function, I think. That's the way I saw it used a lot. You can use Wakelet for the exact same thing, but in having conversations with other people that use Wakelet, there's actually a Facebook group now, and I think a Twitter chat that started recently on Wednesday nights. But so like imagine when you go to a conference, right? So let's say I'm compiling tweets from the conference, and when you usually go to a conference, you see the list of resources within particular sessions. But let's say you couldn't decide between two sessions, you go to one, and then eventually you try to grab the resources from the other session at the conference. But what if there was a set of tweets that was also the discussion that was happening within that session that ties to those resources? That's something that Wakelet is trying to do in terms of what they're doing with their app, is like really hone in on singular conversations, or you can curate blog posts with tweets, with videos, with you name it. It's a pretty powerful tool.
That's awesome. Next, recommend a book. And you're right, we sort of dipped our toe into this pool a little bit earlier, but recommend a book that you've been reading lately or one of your all-time faves, and tell us why you recommend it.
One of my all-time faves, like I said, is Mindset by Carol Dweck. It's been a book that I've been able to apply to my educational life, my life as a dad, my life as a husband, my life as a coach. There's just so many great takeaways if you read it that way. If you just read it as face value and say, okay, this is good, then I need to talk this way to kids in order to generate good feedback and get them motivated, then that's what it could be. But if you truly internalize it in various aspects of your life, it can be pretty profound, I think. I think one of the first things I did after reading the book, my oldest son was about 3 or 4, and I grabbed my wife by the shoulders and I said, "We have to stop telling our son that he's smart." And she laughed. She's like, "What are you talking about?" So she then read the book too, and it's just been a really great tool for us as parents, but also as husband and wife, as teacher, coach, you name it.
I'm with you, Jared. I think if there was one book I could recommend, this would be it. Absolutely life-changing and practice-changing. Next, are you a podcast listener? And if so, tell us about one that we need to slip into our podcast deck.
I am a podcast listener because I do jump around from district to district. I do have some road time to listen. And I mean, other than this podcast, obviously, but
Obviously.
yeah, I would say the one that I continually enjoy is the TED Radio Hour. And it isn't even really like, I want to say, educationally based. It's not like those podcasts that are so focused on just education, but I find myself taking really big, thoughtful takeaways from a lot of those episodes because I'm always asking myself, how does this big idea apply to this aspect of my life? Or how does this big idea apply to that? And so that's just one that I feel like I've taken so many big takeaways from it that it's made the greatest impact. And I've just really enjoyed every episode that comes out.
Two more questions, Jared, and they're both around video. First of all, do you have a YouTube channel that you enjoy? And this might be, one that is helpful professionally or one that just personally amuses you.
So, you know how the previous question was about like, what do I enjoy doing as a passion of learning outside of education?
Yeah.
Well, I also could include this one. Videography is a big passion of mine. I did wedding videography for 6 years before I had kids, and it was one of the classes that I taught at the university level. And so there's a YouTube channel, Ryan Nangle. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, to be honest with you, but he does a lot of Final Cut Pro tutorials. And I just within the last few months downloaded Final Cut Pro for the first time and have loved it. And so I enjoy his YouTube channel because he gives you some little free tidbits, but a lot of great simple tutorials on just some editing. And I've really taken a lot of those away very quickly and apply them very quickly to some of the video content that I try to put out there as well.
Last question, Jared, just for fun. You're at the end of your day. You've got no energy left for anything productive. What is it that you're watching on Netflix right now?
This is such a great question. I love it because every educator is this way. Honestly, it's whatever my wife is watching, and right now that's Orange is the New Black. That's what we do at night. We watch something together, and there's nothing in particular that I would say really strikes my fancy at any given moment because I'm just so focused on other stuff. So I just tag along with whatever she's watching.
Right. Well, that makes sense, Jared, and that is always the safe answer, right? Whatever the wife is watching.
Yep, exactly.
Jared, you are a very cool guy, very well spoken, and very interested in the book. I'm going to have to get that onto my Kindle ASAP. What are the best ways for people to follow you and get to know your content a little better?
So I would say the central hub for everything is professionallydriven.com. I got a ton of content on there. A lot of it's free. I got a whole page on free resources that could be printed off. I also try to put a lot of videos. I'm doing a lot of video content now. Like this next Tuesday, we do a Twitter chat every Tuesday night, and at 8 o'clock Central at #ProDriven. And so this next Tuesday, we're going to try something a little different. Instead of a regular Twitter chat, we're going to do a live stream Q&A with actually Mandy Freilich. And so we're going to try to do that maybe once a month and so forth. But I would say professionallydriven.com will have all the other ways you can get in touch with me, either Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. I don't have a LinkedIn link in there yet, but I do have a LinkedIn, but there's a lot of different ways, and I would just say professionallydriven.com.
Well, Jared, thank you so much for this. Again, if you missed it the first time, listener, that professionally driven refers to PD, just another way to rethink and reimagine PD and what PD can represent for every educator. So really appreciate your message, Jared. I think you're onto some really big things here. Thank you so much for your time and enjoy the rest of your summer.
Thank you so much for having me. I've enjoyed this conversation.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Teachers on Fire, where teachers come to share, learn, and be inspired. Please subscribe to the podcast, leave us a review on iTunes, and follow us on Twitter at Teachers on Fire. I'm your host, Tim Cavey, saying goodbye for now, and we'll catch you next time, right here on the Teachers on Fire podcast.